Welcome to the Irish Tech News podcast, where we will bring you some of the most interesting interviews and features from the world of tech. Visit irishtechnews.ie and check out our podcast section to explore all of our previous episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast using whatever your favourite app or service is by visiting anchor.fm/Irish-tech-news. And now, a word from our sponsor, Agorapulse. We know how hard it is to juggle all the things in your business. Accounts, meetings, the never-ending inbox. That's why we've teamed up with Agorapulse to give you more than 5 hours back a week when it comes to managing your social media marketing. No complicated Excel docs, long emails, or millions of open tabs. Simply manage all your social media channels in one place. Go to www.agorapulse.com/Irish Tech News to get 1 month free. Now all you have to do is figure out how you want to spend those spare 5 hours.
So today on the Irish Tech News podcast, we have somebody who wrote a very interesting book that went very deep into apples, growing apples, making cider, and a whole load of interesting musings on it. So first of all, who do we have the pleasure of talking to today?
Hi, Simon. My name's Andy Brennan.
Great. And for those that don't know about you, how would you describe what it is that you do now and who you are?
Well, I've had a lot of careers in the past, but I'm an apple cider producer. We have a small farm winery, but for the most part, I'm an apple grower, or at least that's how I got into making cider. And before that, I was an artist living in New York, and even though that doesn't sound related to apple farming, I've found it to be very informative.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, that's definitely something that in your book, I think you definitely do join up the dots and see the link. So, I mean, so your book is called Uncultivated: Wild Apples, Real Cider, and the Complicated Art of Making a Living. And in some ways, you know, it's both a book about apples and not about apples. Would that be a fair comment about the book?
I think that's a very fair comment. My muse now is wild apple trees, which are very different than cultivated apple trees, and it's about wild apples in the same way that old book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance is about motorcycles. It's wild apples have gone on to teach me so much about how to transition, like I said, from New York City to a very rural existence and an entirely different economy. So yeah, wild apple trees are my muse, but it's not necessarily about that.
Yeah, and I think the comparison to Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance is a good one, because you know, I think you have used it as a way to reflect. I mean, and I'm just looking for it now, but there's an illustration in it of like 3 different types of trees, and therefore by the way the tree is, you can tell if it's natural or planted or self-seeded. I mean, and so I didn't realize, but how difficult it is to grow trees naturally, and yet they do grow naturally too. So it's a funny one, isn't it?
It is funny. In fact, when I first started joining farmers meetings, and I don't know, this was 15 years ago, a lot of people, a lot of farmers just claimed what I was seeing as wild apples didn't exist, that they were just abandoned orchards. But it isn't true. There are parts of the United States, and I believe Ireland actually too, where the seeds escape to hedgerows or stone walls, or just sort of the fringes of society, so to speak, like the sides of a road, and a wild apple tree will pop up, and the story of its survival or acclimation to that particular place is, I think, is well, not to get teary, but it's it means everything. means everything to me, and I think it has a resounding message for survival for all of us.
Yes, and then there's one bit where you talk about apples, cider apples, and making cider, and the nuances and the differences between it. And yet at the same time, you're aware that it's almost a philosophical differentiation between them. So that must be. I thought it was both an interesting idea and then also, almost to the point of making things complicated as well, isn't it? Because like, is this a cider apple, or is it just an apple that you make into cider? Can you kind of elaborate on that? Because in the book, I thought it was interesting.
Well, yeah. So getting back to a little bit of what you said earlier, the difficulties of growing apples is tremendous, and in fact, they are the most manipulated crop, at least here in America. I think worldwide, maybe bananas take that title, but they require enormous amount of sprays, soil manipulation, and to get what you see in the farmers market, these perfect shiny apples. Truly, those are freaks of nature. No apple really should look like that, large and juicy and blemish free, unless you lived in a very unique area which doesn't have disease and insect pressures. But long story short, they're extremely manipulated, and that is the story of cultivation. And wild apples do pop up, and despite the odds, they do survive, like I said, in the fringes, and that's the story of the wild. So we're talking about cultivation versus the wild, which is, philosophically, that's like we're talking about human nature versus nature, and seeing that gap and studying that gap, I found that to be parallel between various economies, like the modern sort of a growth economy versus the old homestead economy. There are parallels everywhere, which I try to point out. Perhaps some examples better than others, but I like to think of that and as a duality. There's cultivation versus uncultivation, which is the title of the book, which is really my way of saying the wild. And philosophically, it's an issue that I'm sure if I were to continue to write, I could write about forever.
But I think that's what makes it an interesting read, and a bit like Zen and the Art as well. You created a high-end cider from a very specific type of cider, apples, and so I guess from when the book was written to now, do you still do this? Because in the book you muse that you're concerned that the popularity of what you were doing might be faddish, and while slow food and terroir and the value of very, very specific things was being valued, you were concerned that the roundabout might move on and people might no longer value this. So where are you? Do people still value this approach to making cider?
It's that's a great question, and perhaps I've not given people the benefit of the doubt by suggesting that this old-fashioned way of making cider and growing apples was a dying thing. But in fact, actually, I think cider as a whole is growing, and even say 10 years ago, if we were just, and I mean like the sort of artisanal cider makers, were just 1% of the overall cider on the market, and we might still be 1%, but cider as a whole category has grown. And I'm finding now people are able to talk at farmers markets. People are discovering other producers, and I don't feel like such a anomaly. They'll bring up these apple types known as cider varieties, and to me, I find that jaw dropping that lay people understand the difference between a cider variety and a common eating variety. Which, if you'll allow me, I'll briefly say. So apples are insanely genetically diverse. They have, I believe, something like 60,000 genes too, which is 3 times what humans have, something like 20,000. But when you start doing the crossing, that number becomes exponentially greater. So apples should be, if left to their own reproductive strategy, every single apple should be unique, and that diversity is exponentially greater than the diversity that humans have, in terms of and there's never been 2 humans the same. How we end up with common apple varieties are it's through a system known as grafting, where you take and I'm sure most people understand this concept. You take a tissue from a apple tree that you like, and you graft that onto the root system of another apple tree, a compatible root system. And above that graft, or now the scion, the same variety that you preferred then turns into a tree, and that's essentially that is cloning. And so when you have a variety in a grocery store that you like, that's from a cloned tree. And like I said, wild trees are their own variety, and they express that particular gene combination, which 9 times out of 10 have properties we don't like to eat, such as tannin or high acid. When, as it turns out, those are exactly the properties you want for cider. It's just that not enough people have been growing apples specifically for cider, or they've been using leftover eating apples, which are devoid of tannin and acid, which also explains why so much of the cider market is mediocre. But when an apple tree is left to its own devices genetically, it will produce an apple which is 9 times out of 10 good for making cider. I happen to learn all of this just out of luck of being around so many wild apples. I don't know if I explained that or not.
No, that's good. It's good. And like you say, it's just amazing that apples are potentially, or they are genetically more diverse than humans, and therefore without the grafted stocks, you get a different type. But you see, from what you're saying, that rather than it being faddish, it's that actually it is going the other way, that you have a more informed and aware audience of what you're doing. I mean, and so, with the slow movement, and over here, like it's called the taste of West Cork. So similarly, people have realized the value even more so. So it seems like it hasn't gone away. So in this context, if you had a magic wand, what would good look like for the wild apple approach to farming and making cider going forwards in the future? Do you think it's something that you would see more of, or is it by the very nature of it that it will be more of a niche thing that people do?
It probably will always be a niche thing, but hopefully that niche becomes more influential on the larger market. I think what good looks like is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of small farmers rather than cider producers, in every little microclimate where apples can grow, similar to the way wine has developed. The parts of you'll find wine growing in far valleys of Austria and Galicia. It's everywhere, and that hasn't happened for apples. There's in the large economy, people are doing just the opposite. They're trying to reduce the number of varieties and in some ways reduce the number of farmers, because there's an economy to being one large farm. So historically, that's made it difficult for small farmers to survive. But as customers and people are discovering truly good cider, alive cider, they're starting to support and investigate what makes their area unique. What apples, what cider varieties were born in Irish soil versus what were born in New York soil. And rather than everybody growing some apple from Somerset, which maybe your listeners know, one of the great cider regions, that I guess the West Country, and rather than just bringing over those cider varieties, we should be exploring what varieties were adaptive to our particular areas. So again, I think the answer is thousands, hundreds in each country of small producers who have the luxury in some ways of not trying to live up to the Balmers or the Bagners. They can discover their own voice, discover the apple's voice, and really build a sincere relationship with the community.
Yeah, look, I think what you say makes sense, and yeah, definitely. I mean, Somerset, yeah, and Magners and Bulmers, it is a thing, but in the same way that people went away from Budweiser and Heineken because it was just mass produced. In Ireland, you've had an explosion of craft beer, craft gins, and craft whiskies. So it would seem to only make sense that cider will be the area that follows next. So and for all the reasons that you're explaining. So for you, what are your sources of information and inspiration? From the book, it suggests that you're drawing on, quite a wide range. But I just wondered, how do you stay up to date, and who inspires you?
Well, there are apple growers in a community here in the Northeast United States. We call ourselves the Holistic Orchard Network, but it's really the sort of organic and macrobiotic or biodynamic growers in the wine and the apple community that have inspired me as a cider producer and as an artist in general. There's a few cider producers from the first generation here in America of back to the landers who had discovered English cider, and they were the first to really introduce me. I guess I'm the second generation of sort of artisanal cider makers. I will forever be indebted to Steve Wood at Farm Hill and the Maloney's at West County Cider in Massachusetts. And it's the small New England farmers that I think that braved the economy of scale, or the opposite of the economy of scale. And I feel somewhat obligated to try to encourage that for the next generation as well. Keep it going. Keep that sort of micro economy growing.
Yeah, exactly. And it is something you acknowledge in the book, and you also talk about aiming to plant more trees or encourage and do experiments. So is that something you're still doing, and what are your plans for the future? Obviously, I'm guessing it's not to, bigger and bigger it like from the Dr. Seuss book, but
Mhm.
the Onceler, so what are your plans for the future?
For the future, I think I'd like to get a little bit more into education, and it's even though I probably said ad nauseam in the book, I'm introverted. I'd like to open up and have people here and show people what apple trees can do, and it's a beautiful world apples create on their own, and I don't want it to be just a privilege for us and up here in the mountains. I I like it. I like other people to discover like I said, the philosophical marvel, the all the analogies that wild apples are, that they're lessons. I want people to understand the lessons that these trees are capable of teaching us.
Yeah, definitely. So my penultimate question is, what tips would you give? I mean, because like we're trying to grow apple trees, and sometimes the wind knocks the flowers off. So what are the best things that people can do to try and grow apples and wild apples as well, if possible?
Well, never give up. That's a universal message. But don't invest everything into one or two trees. I know space is limited, but it's not the tree's natural way of reproducing. Some trees produce 10 bushels of apples. I don't know, that's 1,500 apples in a year, and each of those have 5 seeds. So we're talking over 6,000 potential seeds in one year. And
Hmm.
so its reproduction system is, or design is to be everywhere, and try and try and try. So if we're just going to plant one tree, or even a small orchard of 10 trees, it's okay. It's to be expected that that a great number of those weren't naturally a fit for that location. So um, I think diversity and keep trying. That's my um, that's the lesson I learned, at least from um, apple trees.
Yeah, and I guess, like you say, it's something where you have to have a multi-year approach, because the weather conditions are never quite the same every year. So you can have good years and less good years, really.
Mm, it's it's true. A multi-year and multi-century approach, even. Yeah, we're talking about a tree that could live 300-400 years. So we need to keep that perspective, that timeline in perspective when we work with these trees.
Yeah, look, I mean, and with Ireland, like there is a place in Arta where they have some old Irish varieties, and they can look nearly dead, and then sometimes they get a bit of a pruning, and trees that are over 100 years old put fruit back out that haven't done it for a while. So they are very interesting. I guess it makes me wonder. I mean, because I think apples originally originated in Kazakhstan. So, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. Is there anywhere in the world whose apple trees that you've always wanted to go and see, or that you would like to go and see?
Well, I'm not going to correct you because I believe you are correct. Kazakhstan and the Tian Shan Mountains, which separate them from China. But we're talking Central Asia, and a mysterious place, would be a great place to travel. But now they are all over the world, and they're going rogue, so to speak. And I've heard, and although I've never, it's very few people making cider that I know of in the Patagonia region of South America, but I have met a man in his 80s who said he was a rancher down in southern Argentina, and he said he remembers going up in the mountains and bringing down wild apples, and it sounds just like Kazakhstan, honestly, these snow-capped peaks, and they would go up, fill their pickup trucks with apples, and make cider from it. And it's those hard to find places that I think most interest me. Although, how can you argue with a trip to Brittany or the Basque region of Spain, or Asturias, where there are perhaps the world's most advanced cider cultures.
Yeah, and I know what you mean. Like, they make. We used to live in Spain, and they make great cider from Asturias. You reminded me too. We were in Honduras, and we were walking in the the Mosquito Coast, and there was this thing. So manzana is the word in Spanish for apple, and they handed it to us, and it was white and pink, and you peeled the skin off, and so like your book kind of captures this. That there's so many more varieties out there than we probably even realize. Has that been your experience also?
Yeah, I think worldwide there's something like I don't know, 10,000 named varieties, but and these are the cultivated cloned varieties, where exponentially number of wild apples. But yeah, I find that amazing that we've heard of course here in the U.S. Granny Smith and Honeycrisp and Red Delicious. You probably have heard of those too, but you go to I don't know, Romania, and they have a list of 10 common varieties. I haven't heard of any of them. I think that's great. Yeah. Should be more of that.
Yeah, and I guess that's the great thing. It's like seed banks, that we do need to capture and catalog what we have before we lose it. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. How can people learn more about you and your work?
Well, I wish I could say our cider was available. It's hard to get even here in New York. We make such a small amount, but so it's really the book that I think offers the most information on the cross worlds of wild apples and cider making. And we of course have a website, but I always like to plug there's a website called Grow Organic Apples, it's an online forum of sort of hippie apple growers. That's a great source for any sort of apple question. And there are cider makers on that forum as well. And then, of course, we have our own website, which is aaronburrcider.com.
Cool. So we'll include both of those links, and then it sounds like a great rabbit hole that our listeners can go down. So look, Andy, thanks again for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you, Simon. It's a real pleasure to meet you, and thank you again for the opportunity.
And now, a word from our sponsor, Agorapulse. We know how hard it is to juggle all the things in your business. Accounts, meetings, the never-ending inbox. That's why we've teamed up with Agorapulse to give you more than 5 hours back a week when it comes to managing your social media marketing. No complicated Excel docs, long emails, or millions of open tabs. Simply manage all your social media channels in one place. Go to www.agorapulse.com/Irish Tech News to get 1 month free. Now all you have to do is figure out how you want to spend those spare 5 hours. Thank you for listening to the latest Irish Tech News podcast. Check back every day for the latest episode. You can follow us on Twitter @Irish_Tech News, on Facebook, facebook.com/Irish Tech News, on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/company/Irish-Tech-News, on Instagram, instagram.com/IrishTechNews.ie, and on TikTok, tiktok.com/@Irish Tech News.